The barren landscape stretched endlessly, a battlefield of dust and craters left behind by wars fought long before humanity had ever reached the stars. The air shimmered with heat, though the real fire lay in the sneers of the alien soldiers standing at ease, their posture exuding arrogance as they assessed the lone human among them. Sergeant Evelyn Carter adjusted the scope on her sniper rifle, feeling the weight of their gazes like a tangible force pressing against her. She wasn't new to this. The doubt, the scrutiny, the silent, unspoken assumption that she had no place here. One of them finally spoke. A towering, reptilian Valtren with dark mottled scales crossed his arms. His voice was a low rumble, thick with condescension. "Your kind has odd ways, human. Your species favors slow, inefficient methods. I fail to see the purpose of a sniper when orbital bombardment can reduce an entire battalion to ash in seconds." A few chuckles followed. Evelyn didn't flinch. Her fingers lightly brushed the trigger, but she kept her eyes on the target range ahead, 100 metallic dummies lined up in unpredictable patterns, simulating battlefield conditions. The others had already taken their shots, relying on auto-targeting systems and guided energy rifles. Their weapons made the kills clean, effortless. "You're welcome to leave if you don't want to watch," she replied, her voice steady. The Valtren snorted, his nostrils flaring. "Oh, we will watch. I'm curious to see how humans fumble under pressure." Evelyn ignored him and dropped to a knee, exhaling slowly as she aligned her sights. Her rifle wasn't standard issue like theirs. No AI-assisted guidance, no auto-locking tech. Just her and her calculations, wind speed, gravity adjustments, target movement. She waited, feeling the moment settle, the way the universe seemed to still just before she pulled the trigger. A sharp crack cut through the air. The first target's head snapped back, a clean kill at over 1,000 meters. Before the metallic echo faded, she shifted, adjusting ever so slightly. Another shot. Another kill. By the time her magazine was empty, 10 targets lay still. Silence stretched, thick and heavy. One of the alien officers, a Zalari with bioluminescent skin that pulsed faintly in irritation, narrowed his many eyes at the battlefield. "Acceptable," he muttered, as if the word pained him. "But inefficient." Evelyn stood, rolling her shoulders. "You're only saying that because I don't need a machine thinking for me." The Valtren let out a low growl. "A machine doesn't make mistakes." "Neither do I," she said, meeting his gaze without a hint of hesitation. The tension between them was a tangible thing. To them, she was an outlier, an anomaly in a war fought with precision and cold efficiency. The Galactic Council didn't understand humans. Not really. They saw unpredictability as a flaw rather than an advantage. They relied on numbers, on equations, on flawless calculations. But war had never been clean, and she had seen enough blood spilled to know that sometimes the only thing between victory and annihilation was instinct. She turned, ignoring the murmurs behind her, and made her way back toward the command tent. If they didn't believe in her now, they would soon enough. The mission briefing was held inside the reinforced dome at the heart of the outpost. Holographic maps flickered in the air, displaying enemy fortifications, patrol routes, and defensive positions. Evelyn folded her arms, watching as the lead strategist, a Fren officer with metallic plating embedded in his skin, gestured toward a red-marked compound deep within hostile territory. "This stronghold is the linchpin of the enemy's entire forward advance," the officer explained, his mechanical voice devoid of inflection. "Eliminating their commander will cripple their ability to organize further strikes. However, traditional assaults have failed. Their defenses are too well coordinated." Another officer, a sleek-bodied Avenari with translucent wings folded neatly behind her back, tapped at the display. "A precision strike is required," she said. "One that does not trigger their automated countermeasures." Evelyn knew where this was going before they even said it. "The sniper," the Avenari confirmed, shifting her gaze toward Evelyn. Murmurs rippled through the room. It was an unspoken challenge. Even now, there were those who doubted her capabilities. A deep voice rumbled from the back. "An unnecessary risk. The odds of success are low." Evelyn didn't look away from the map. "Define low." "Less than 2%, the friend officer answered flatly. A low whistle came from one of the human Marines standing at the edge of the room, but Evelyn's expression didn't change. "I've worked with worse," she said simply. The Avenari's luminous eyes flickered in quiet consideration. "You'll need to be positioned within a 3-kilometer radius," she continued. "Enemy scanning technology is optimized for energy weapons, but your ballistic rifle should remain undetectable, provided you maintain minimal movement." Evelyn gave a slow nod. She had done harder things before. "We move at dawn," the strategist concluded. Dismissed. The briefing dissolved into murmured conversations, some doubtful, others quietly intrigued. Evelyn felt the weight of their stares as she walked past them, but she had nothing left to prove. Not yet. The next morning, before the twin suns rose over the horizon, Evelyn was already in position. The outpost lay far in the distance, a monolithic structure built into the jagged cliffs. She adjusted her prone position atop a rocky plateau, her body blending into the terrain. Wind howled through the canyons, a natural barrier against the artificial stillness of the enemy's defenses. She peered through her scope, adjusting for heat mirages and elevation. The enemy commander was inside, shielded by layers of reinforced walls and automated sentries. He would only emerge for a brief moment, inspecting his troops during the scheduled rotation. A window of exactly 4 seconds. The alien strategist's words echoed in her mind. Less than 2%. Evelyn flexed her fingers, steadying her breathing. Numbers had never won wars. Patience. She waited, motionless, as minutes turned into hours. The sun climbed, shadows shifting. The enemy remained unaware, oblivious to the lone human lying in the dust. Then, at last, movement. The enemy commander, a towering figure clad in reinforced plating, stepped onto the balcony overseeing the compound. Evelyn exhaled. The wind shifted. Her finger tightened around the trigger. One shot. The report of the rifle echoed across the canyon, swallowed by the wind a second later. The commander jerked, a single red bloom spreading across his armor before he crumpled. Chaos erupted below. Sirens blared. Searchlights swung wildly, scanning for an attacker they would never find. Evelyn was already gone, slipping back into the rocky expanse. By the time she returned to base, reports were already coming in. The enemy's forces were in disarray. The strike had worked. She stepped into the command tent, sweat drying against her skin as she locked eyes with the alien officers who had doubted her. The Valtren studied her for a long moment before finally speaking. His voice was quieter now, edged with something that might have been respect. "You calculated the shot manually?" Evelyn shrugged. "Machines don't make mistakes, right?" He huffed, a sound dangerously close to amusement. She didn't need their validation. But as she walked past them, she couldn't help but smirk. The war was far from over. But this was just the beginning. Evelyn moved through the rocky terrain with practiced silence, her rifle slung across her back as she navigated the labyrinth of jagged cliffs and loose gravel. The planet's twin moons cast long shadows over the canyon, making every step a careful calculation. Above, the sky was a deep, star-speckled abyss, indifferent to the war playing out below. She preferred it that way. The stars didn't judge. They didn't mock her for being human. Behind her, the team of Galactic soldiers moved in formation, their movements precise but noticeably louder. They relied on their advanced cloaking suits, their forms shimmering as active camouflage flickered against the environment. Evelyn relied on something else, her own instincts. She could feel their unease. The last mission had proven her skill, but proving something once wasn't enough. Not to them. She was still an anomaly, an outlier in a war where statistics and probability dictated success. The lead officer, a Zalari named Commander Ven, crouched beside her, his bioluminescent skin pulsing faintly in the darkness. "Scouts report enemy patrols moving toward the eastern ridge. We adjust course or engage." His voice was clipped, professional. He didn't waste words on unnecessary opinions. Evelyn studied the terrain ahead. The enemy base loomed in the distance, its walls bristling with automated turrets and scanning drones. The patrol routes were tightening, converging toward their likely entry point. She tapped the side of her rifle, thinking. Engagement means drawing attention, she murmured. We need them looking the wrong way. Ven's eyes flickered in understanding. You have a solution? Evelyn reached into one of her pouches and pulled out a small projectile, one of her own modifications. A low-tech distraction. Simple, but effective. She tossed it toward the western side of the canyon, where it landed between the rocks with a faint metallic clink. Seconds later, a sharp, high-pitched noise echoed through the night, mimicking the distinct hum of energy weapons powering up. Not enough to fool an advanced AI, but just enough to trigger a response from the patrols. Within moments, the enemy shifted. Spotlights veered west, soldiers repositioning toward the false threat. Evelyn watched them go, her expression unreadable. Now, she said, already moving. The team slipped through the gap in their defenses, the moment of misdirection allowing them to cross undetected. Every step brought them closer to their objective, a fortified sniper's perch overlooking the compound. From there, Evelyn would have her shot. By the time they reached the ridge, the night had deepened, the temperature dropping sharply. Evelyn settled into position, adjusting her rifle as the others spread out behind her. The wind was picking up, an unpredictable factor, but one she could work with. Through her scope, she scanned the compound below. Enemy units moved in tight, calculated formations. Every entrance was guarded, every corridor monitored. The commander would emerge soon, as expected, to oversee the transfer of high-priority intelligence. She exhaled slowly, aligning her sights. The shot was difficult. A high-angle trajectory, compensating for gravity, wind resistance, and possible interference from energy shields. Alien targeting systems would struggle with a shot like this. Their calculations were too rigid. Her finger hovered over the trigger. Then she saw it. A shimmer in the darkness, barely perceptible, a distortion in the air just beyond the compound's perimeter. Her grip tightened. A sniper. Not one of theirs. She adjusted her scope, scanning the ridge opposite hers. The distortion settled for a fraction of a second, revealing the faint outline of a figure cloaked in advanced optical camouflage. The enemy knew they were coming, and they had set a trap of their own. Evelyn's mind worked fast. The enemy sniper had a superior position. If she took her shot at the commander, she'd expose herself immediately. If she hesitated, the opportunity would pass. Either way, the enemy had the advantage. She didn't look away from her scope. "Ven," she murmured. "We're compromised." The commander stiffened, his head tilting slightly. "Location: opposite ridge. Advanced cloaking tech. They've been waiting." Silence. Then, "We abort." Evelyn considered it. A retreat was the logical choice. But logic didn't always win wars. She exhaled, slowing her heartbeat. "No. We adapt." She shifted her aim, focusing on the sniper rather than the enemy commander. The shot was just as difficult, if not more so. The slightest miscalculation, and she'd be the one lying dead in the dust. Wind direction, air density, gravity shift. The sniper was likely using an energy-based weapon, meaning they would need a second to charge their shot. A second she wouldn't give them. The moment stretched. The wind howled. She fired. The bullet cut through the night, a whisper of steel and precision. The enemy sniper flinched. Too late. A sharp, strangled motion, and their form flickered, cloak failing as they tumbled down the ridge. No more hesitation. Evelyn realigned, eyes locking onto the enemy commander below. Her second shot rang out. The commander barely had time to react before the impact struck, sending him crumpling to the ground. The compound exploded into chaos. "Move," Ven ordered, his voice sharp. "Now." They vanished into the cliffs before the enemy could mount a response. Evelyn kept pace, her mind already mapping the fastest route back to extraction. Behind them, the alarms blared, searchlights cutting through the darkness in a desperate attempt to locate the ghost that had struck them down. By the time they reached the rendezvous point, the team was breathless but unscathed. Ven turned to Evelyn, his expression unreadable. "You anticipated the counter-sniper." "I expected an ambush," she corrected. Didn't know what form it would take. A slow nod. The others were watching her differently now. Not just as a human, not just as an anomaly. As a soldier. The Valtren officer who had once doubted her stepped forward, eyes narrowing as he studied her. You did not hesitate. Evelyn met his gaze. Neither did they. A pause. Then, a sharp, approving nod. She exhaled, slinging her rifle over her shoulder. The mission was a success, but the war was far from over. And for the first time, she wasn't the only one who knew it. The rain fell in a steady rhythm, pattering against the rocky outcrop where Evelyn lay motionless. Cold droplets slipped down the back of her neck, soaking into her gear, but she barely noticed. Her breath was slow, measured, her heartbeat a steady drum in her ears. The enemy fortress loomed in the valley below, a monolithic structure of metal and stone, its defenses a nearly impenetrable web of automated turrets, shield generators, and relentless patrols. It was a fortress designed to withstand entire fleets, to crush orbital bombardments before they could even scratch its surface. And yet, all it took was one bullet in the right place to bring it all crashing down. Her scope tracked the movement of a single target, a tall, armored figure flanked by a retinue of guards. General Kether, the architect of this war. His forces had been unstoppable, pushing deep into occupied sectors, shattering resistance with ruthless precision. He had never been caught off guard, never exposed. Until now. This was the moment. The one chance to end the war before it escalated into something worse. The wind howled through the valley, a fickle thing that shifted unpredictably. The shot was impossibly difficult. Even an AI-assisted targeting system would struggle to compensate for the atmospheric interference. But Evelyn had never relied on machines to make her decisions. A flicker of movement caught her attention, a shimmer along the rooftops. Another sniper. She barely adjusted her breathing, keeping her focus steady. This was expected. General Kether was too valuable to be left unguarded. There would be counter-snipers, hidden sentries, every precaution taken to ensure he survived. She adjusted her angle, letting her finger rest lightly against the trigger. One shot. One chance. A second of stillness, the kind of silence that only existed before the world changed. She fired. The counter-sniper reacted first, their scope flashing with recognition, but they were a fraction too slow. Evelyn's bullet reached them first, cutting through the night in a whisper of steel and velocity. Their body jerked, then crumpled, their rifle slipping from limp fingers. No time to confirm. She adjusted, shifting her aim back to Kether. The enemy commander had already begun to react, his guards forming a defensive wall around him. A normal shot wouldn't work now. The angle was compromised. The moment slipping away. Evelyn exhaled, feeling the rifle steady beneath her grip. A single opening. A space between the guards, barely a hand's width apart. A moment that would last less than a breath. She pulled the trigger. The bullet cut through the gap as if guided by fate itself. It struck true, embedding itself into the weak spot of Kether's armor, just beneath the reinforced plating at his neck. He staggered, a choked sound escaping his lips before his knees buckled. For a second, there was nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the rain and the distant echo of the shot that had changed the course of the war. Then, chaos erupted. Guards shouted. Weapons fired wildly into the cliffs. Spotlights roved in frantic, sweeping arcs, searching for the assassin they would never find. Evelyn was already gone. Evelyn's breath came slow and measured as she crouched in the shadow of a jagged rock formation, the echoes of chaos still ringing through the valley below. The rain had softened to a drizzle, turning the dust beneath her boots into thick mud, but she hardly noticed. She had taken the shot. She had done the impossible. And yet, the war was still here. Through her scope, she could see the aftermath unfolding in real time. General Kether's lifeless body lay sprawled in the open courtyard, crimson seeping into the metal plating of the fortress. His guards had been too slow to react, and now they milled about in frantic disarray. Some barked orders, some scoured the cliffs with scanning devices, and others simply stood in stunned silence, as if refusing to believe their commander was truly gone. She wished she could have felt satisfaction. The mission had been a success, By every metric, this should have been a victory. And yet, as she watched, the fortress did not crumble. The enemy did not surrender. If anything, they adapted. New orders were already taking shape. The enemy's chain of command had not shattered, it had only shifted. Where Kether had fallen, another figure would rise. Where his forces had hesitated, they would soon find renewed purpose. Evelyn had ended a life, but she hadn't ended the war. A sharp voice crackled over her earpiece. "Carter, we have movement inbound. You need to exfil now." Commander Ven's tone was edged with urgency, but Evelyn's expression remained unreadable. She was already moving before he finished speaking, her body slipping into the natural folds of the terrain, vanishing into the darkness like a phantom. The journey back to the extraction point was a slow, grueling crawl. The enemy had tightened their search perimeter, sweeping the cliffs with more precision than before. Drone patrols hovered above, their sensors humming with artificial hunger. Soldiers moved in coordinated units, each step calculated. But Evelyn had spent her entire career slipping between the cracks. She kept her pace steady, using the environment to her advantage. A sudden gust of wind masked the sound of her boots against wet stone. The dim moonlight cast long, distorted shadows, making her indistinguishable from the jagged rocks around her. A single shift in movement, a breath too loud, a misstep against loose gravel, would mean death. The sound of voices drifted closer. Deep, guttural tones, Valtren dialect. She pressed herself flat against the ground, listening. "She's still here," one of them growled. "No way she got out that fast." "She won't get out at all," another replied. "This is a dead sector. If she's still breathing, she's already lost." Evelyn shut her eyes for a brief second, steadying her thoughts. They weren't wrong. The usual extraction routes had been compromised. If she followed protocol, she'd be walking straight into a kill zone, which meant protocol was no longer an option. She tapped her earpiece once. Then. A brief pause, then his response. "What is it?" "I'm changing course. Too much heat on the main path. I'll meet you at the secondary rendezvous." "Negative," Ven snapped. "That route's untested. You'd be going in blind." "I'll take my chances." A longer pause. Then, with a reluctant sigh, "Copy that. We'll be waiting." Evelyn didn't hesitate. She turned westward, slipping into a narrow ravine where the terrain became uneven and treacherous. The enemy wouldn't expect her to take this route, too unpredictable, too unstable. But she thrived in the unpredictable. Every step was slow, deliberate. The rocks were slick with rain, the ground uneven. One wrong move, and she'd tumble into the darkness below. But Evelyn had never been one to misstep. She pushed forward, her breath steady, her rifle tight against her back. The world narrowed to the rhythm of her own movements. The sound of the wind, the distant murmurs of searching enemies, the feel of rough stone beneath her fingers. She moved like a ghost through the ravine, unseen, unheard. By the time she reached the extraction point, dawn was breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of deep blue and violet. A low hum filled the air, the sound of a cloaked dropship hovering just beyond the ridge. Evelyn didn't stop moving until she was inside, the doors sealing shut behind her. Commander Ven stood waiting, his expression unreadable. "I don't like it when you improvise," he said. Evelyn dropped into a seat, exhaling for the first time in what felt like hours. "Neither do they," she muttered, jerking her chin toward the fortress in the distance. Even from here, she could see the renewed activity, the signs of an enemy force adapting, preparing for the next phase of war. Ven followed her gaze, then let out a slow sigh. "You did it." She nodded once. "And it won't be enough. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But she wasn't done, either.